Ready to dive into the hidden world of sugar.
Yeah.
We're going deep with endocrinologist Dr. Robert Lustig, and let me tell you, this is about way more than just cutting back on cookies. Some
Right.
of his insights were real eye-openers.
Yeah, it's fascinating how he dismantles that whole traditional calorie counting approach.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
like calories aren't the main culprit when it comes to things like weight gain or metabolic health,
Exactly. It's like a
which
lot
is
of,
just kind of mind blowing for a lot of people, I
yeah,
think.
totally. And he's saying insulin is the real villain in this story. Insulin, remember that from like way back in biology class?
Oh, yeah.
Regulates blood sugar.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And Dr. Lustig's research suggests it plays a much bigger role than we thought. He
Mhm.
talks about this thing called insulin resistance, and understanding how that develops is kind of key to the whole thing.
Okay.
So imagine your cells have these little doorways, and insulin's like the key that unlocks those doors, allowing glucose to enter and provide energy.
Oh.
But when you flood your body with too much sugar and refined carbs, those cells get overwhelmed. Oh, they're like, we've hit our sugar quota for the century.
Right, exactly. So they become resistant, those doorways get sluggish, and that glucose struggles to get in, and your pancreas has to pump out even more insulin, trying to force feed those cells.
So your poor pancreas is working overtime and your cells are still starving.
Exactly.
What happens then?
Well, that's when you get into a whole heap of trouble.
Oh.
It triggers this domino effect of metabolic problems.
Oh, no.
Weight gain, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, you name it.
The whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. And that's why Dr. Lustig actually calls his clinic an insulin reduction clinic. That's how central this is to his whole approach.
He's putting insulin resistance in the spotlight for sure.
Absolutely.
And what I found really interesting too was his take on different types of sugar. You know, we hear too much sugar is bad, but he's saying it's even more nuanced than that. Oh, absolutely. He dives into this difference between glucose, which is your body's primary energy source, versus fructose, which is that sweeter component of sugar that you often find in processed foods and drinks.
Okay.
And he actually compares fructose to alcohol.
We all know fructose is like alcohol.
He makes that comparison.
How so?
Well, they're metabolized similarly by the liver.
Okay.
And so just like drinking too much alcohol can damage your liver, high amounts of fructose can have similar toxic effects.
Wow, I've never heard that comparison before. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it can even lead to, you know, that beer belly physique.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But isn't a little fructose? Okay, I mean, fruit has fructose, right?
It does, but in much smaller doses than what you find in processed foods.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and he actually says that the average person consumes 4 times the amount of fructose their liver can handle daily.
4 times.
4 times.
That's wild. Okay, so we're talking about things our liver doesn't like. What about fat? I'm curious to hear how that plays into all of this.
Right. So this is where Dr. Lustig really challenges that old fat is bad notion.
Okay.
He breaks it down into 3 types of fat:
Okay.
subcutaneous, visceral, and liver fat.
So subcutaneous, that's like the pinchable, I can pinch it fat.
Exactly. And while too much of it isn't great, it's the least harmful of the 3.
Okay.
Then you've got visceral fat, which is that deeper belly fat that surrounds your organs.
That's the dangerous one that we always hear about.
Right, exactly.
Duh.
But here's the kicker. Even small amounts of liver fat are the most dangerous type.
Really?
Yeah.
Even more so than belly fat.
That's what his research suggests, and it's a major contributor to metabolic disease.
Wow.
And this is where that term skinny fat comes in.
Skinny fat.
Yeah, you might look thin on the outside, but you've got these dangerous levels of liver fat, often caused by, you guessed it, excess fructose consumption.
Skinny fat. That's unsettling. So someone can look healthy, but be facing some serious risks because of their liver. This is making me rethink every bottle of juice I see.
So we're talking about things our liver doesn't like, but it's not just about our liver, is it?
No, not at all.
Mm.
And this is where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Dr. Lustig talks about this powerful connection between our gut and our brain. You know, that whole gut feeling thing?
Yeah.
Well, he takes it a step further with this concept of the gut-brain axis.
The gut-brain axis. Okay, so we touched on the microbiome a little bit earlier, but how does what's happening in our gut actually impact our brain? Especially when it comes to things like stress and cravings.
So picture this, a bustling highway of information constantly flowing between your gut and your brain.
Okay.
That's the gut-brain axis. It's a two-way street where your digestive system and your central nervous system are in constant communication through nerves, hormones, and of course those trillions of bacteria that call your gut home.
So it's not just about digestion. Our gut is actually sending signals to our brain that can affect how we think and feel. Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Lustig points to research showing that an imbalanced microbiome, which is often caused by, you guessed it, a diet high in processed foods and low in fiber, it can actually lead to increased inflammation. And not just in the gut, but throughout the body, including the brain.
Inflammation in the brain? That doesn't sound good. What are the implications of that?
Well, chronic inflammation in the brain can really disrupt that delicate balance of neurotransmitters. Those chemical messengers that control everything from our mood to our stress response.
Right.
It's like a domino effect, starting in the gut and impacting our mental and emotional well-being.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if our gut is sending out stress signals, it's no wonder we might feel more anxious or reach for those sugary comfort foods. Yeah.
Exactly. And when we're chronically stressed, our bodies release cortisol, that stress hormone.
Right.
And Dr. Lustig highlights how cortisol can further disrupt the balance of bacteria in our gut, leading to this vicious cycle of inflammation, cravings, and just poor food choices overall.
So it's like a double whammy. Stress messes with our gut, which then sends more stress signals back to the brain. It's like a never-ending loop.
Exactly.
So how do we break free from this? What does Dr. Lustig recommend?
Well, he's a big advocate for what he calls a Mediterranean-style diet.
Yeah.
Lots of fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy fats, lean proteins.
Right.
This way of eating is naturally rich in fiber antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds, all of which can really support that healthy gut-brain connection.
It's funny how so much of this comes back to real whole foods.
Right.
Like our bodies just thrive on what nature provides.
It's true. And don't forget about fermented foods. You've got your yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi.
Right.
These are packed with beneficial bacteria that can really help diversify and balance the microbiome.
Yeah, I've definitely heard good things about fermented foods, but it's not just about what we eat right. Our lifestyles play a huge role here too.
Absolutely. Dr. Lustig really emphasizes the importance of stress management through practices like mindfulness meditation, yoga. These practices can help calm the mind, reduce those cortisol levels, and just create a more harmonious environment for your gut bacteria to thrive.
So finding ways to de-stress is not only good for our mental health, but also for our gut health.
Precisely. A total win-win.
I like it.
And let's not forget about sleep.
Oh yeah, sleep, that's important.
Dr. Lustig highlights research showing that chronic sleep deprivation can actually negatively impact both gut health and brain health.
Really?
Yeah, it can increase inflammation and even impair cognitive function.
That makes sense. When I'm sleep deprived, I feel it everywhere, including my gut. And I'm way more likely to crave sugary foods when I'm tired.
Exactly. Your body's basically looking for that quick energy fix.
Right.
But unfortunately, that quick fix often leads to that vicious cycle of sugar crashes and then even more cravings.
It's a slippery slope. So we're talking about a much more holistic approach here. Nourishing our bodies with real food, managing stress, getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
It's about taking care of ourselves on multiple levels.
Absolutely. And that includes being mindful of those environmental toxins that we're exposed to.
This goes back to those obesogens we were talking about earlier, right?
Exactly. Those chemicals that can interfere with our hormones.
Right.
Dr. Lustig argues that these endocrine-disrupting chemicals, which are found in everything from pesticides and plastics to even personal care products, they can really contribute to a whole host of problems, including weight gain, metabolic issues, even an increased risk of certain cancers.
It's overwhelming to think about all the potential toxins lurking in our food, our products, our environment. It makes you want to live in a bubble.
Right.
But that's not realistic.
Yeah.
So what can we do?
Well, we can't control everything, but we can make conscious choices to minimize our exposure.
Yeah.
Choosing organic produce whenever possible, switching to natural cleaning and personal care products, filtering our water, advocating for stricter regulations on these chemicals. These are all steps in the right direction.
So it's about taking back control wherever we can and making informed decisions that really support our health. It feels empowering to focus on what we can do rather than getting bogged down in what we can't.
I love that.
But all this talk about making changes brings up something I've been thinking about a lot. How do we actually motivate ourselves and others to make lasting positive changes? It's one thing to understand all this science, but it's another thing entirely to put it into practice.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's interesting because Dr. Lustig actually talks about something called motivational interviewing.
Motivational interviewing, what is that?
So it's a counseling approach that essentially helps individuals explore their own motivations for change
Okay.
and identify any barriers that might be holding them back. So instead of just telling someone what to do, it's more about guiding them to discover their own reasons for wanting to make healthier choices.
So it's about empowering people to take ownership of their health rather than dictating what they should or shouldn't do.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Dr. Lustig has actually applied this approach not just in his clinical practice, but also on a broader societal level.
Really? What does that look like on a larger scale?
He's been a huge advocate for policy changes that create healthier food environments.
Right.
Things like taxing sugary drinks, regulating marketing to children, making fresh, healthy foods more accessible and affordable for everyone.
So it's like shifting the focus from individual blame to more of a collective responsibility.
Right.
Instead of saying you should know better, it's about creating a world where the healthy choice is the easy choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's not letting the food industry off the hook either.
Yeah.
He argues that we need to create a system where making those healthy choices isn't a constant uphill battle against this tidal wave of temptation.
Which it often feels like.
Right.
It's so hard to resist those sugary cravings when you're constantly bombarded with advertising and surrounded by cheap processed food options.
It is. And that brings us back to that question of free will, which Dr. Lustig kind of grapples with throughout this whole interview.
Yeah.
He argues that while we may not have complete control over our biology or our environment, we do have the power to choose how we respond to those influences.
So it's not about blaming ourselves or feeling powerless, but rather understanding the forces at play and then making conscious choices that align with our values and goals.
Exactly.
It's about taking back our health one decision at a time.
Yeah.
But before we move on, there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to unpack. Dr. Lustig talks about sugar addiction and the need for some kind of societal intervention to address it. A controversial topic, but it feels important to explore further.
Absolutely. And we will in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, let's talk about sugar addiction. Is it a real thing or is it just a matter of willpower?
It's a question that definitely sparks a lot of debate, but Dr. Lustig presents a pretty compelling argument in this interview. He points to a growing body of research that shows that sugar can actually affect the brain in ways similar to addictive drugs.
That's a pretty bold statement. What's the science behind that comparison?
Well, remember those reward pathways in the brain we talked about earlier?
Yeah?
When we eat sugar, our brains release dopamine, which makes us feel good.
Right.
But over time, with repeated exposure to sugar, the brain can actually become less sensitive to dopamine's effects.
So you're saying we need more and more sugar to get that same pleasure response?
Exactly. It's like building up a tolerance, just like with drug addiction.
Wow.
And just like with addictive drugs, sugar can trigger cravings, withdrawal symptoms, even a sense of losing control over your consumption.
That's kind of scary to think about. But some people might argue that it all comes down to personal responsibility.
Yeah.
If you know sugar is bad for you, just eat less of it, right?
It's not always that easy. And Dr. Lustig actually addresses this head-on. He argues that the food industry has deliberately engineered processed foods to be hyper-palatable.
Hyperpalatable.
Yeah, they're loaded up with a sugar, salt, and fat, designed to make them almost irresistible.
So they've basically hijacked our brain's reward system for profit.
That's his argument. And this is where that conversation about societal intervention becomes really crucial.
Okay.
He draws these parallels to other public health crises like smoking and alcohol abuse, where regulation and education have actually played a huge role in reducing consumption and mitigating harm.
So he's saying we need to treat sugar overconsumption more like a public health crisis and less like a personal failing.
Exactly. And he proposes this multi-pronged approach. Things like taxing sugary drinks, regulating marketing to children, providing clear science-based nutrition education in schools and through public health campaigns.
These are some pretty bold ideas.
Yeah,
But have these kinds of interventions actually worked in other contexts?
there's definitely some promising evidence. Dr. Lustig points to the UK's effort to reduce sodium levels in processed foods. It's actually led to a pretty significant decline in heart disease.
So if it worked for salt, it could work for sugar. It's interesting to consider those parallels.
Exactly. Of course, there are challenges. Anytime you're talking about regulating the food industry, you're going to face resistance and pushback.
Right.
But Dr. Lustig seems optimistic that we can make progress.
Well, his optimism is encouraging.
Mhm.
What fuels that hope for him?
I think it really comes down to his belief in the power of knowledge.
Okay.
He emphasizes throughout this interview that once we understand the science behind these issues, we can start to make more informed choices.
Knowledge is power, right?
Mhm.
So where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals and as a society to kind of break free from sugar's grip and create a healthier world?
I think it starts with awareness, which is why these conversations are so important.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about how sugar impacts our brains and bodies, the better equipped we are to make those healthy choices for ourselves and our families.
And it's not just about willpower, right? It's about creating environments that actually support those choices. We need to advocate for change at a societal level while also taking charge of our own health.
Exactly. Cooking more meals at home, seeking out those fresh whole foods supporting policies that promote healthy food environments, these are all steps in the right direction.
It's about taking a stand for our health, both individually and collectively, and remembering that even small changes can make a big difference.
I love that.
This has been an incredible deep dive, eye-opening, thought-provoking, and honestly a bit life-changing. I know I'm going to be thinking about these ideas for a long time.
Me too. Dr. Lustig's work is such a powerful reminder that we have more control over our health than we often realize. It's not always easy, but by making conscious choices and advocating for a healthier food system, we can create a brighter future for ourselves and for generations to come.
So well said. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep seeking out that knowledge that empowers you to live your healthiest, happiest life.